When it comes to Extreme Rules, the last 8 years have rarely seen WWE embrace the pay-per-view title, particularly in the last few years. While a potentially great idea on paper, Extreme Rules often ends up asking more questions than it answers, as fans approach the pay-per-view with ECW level expectations and end up leaving with the reality of James Ellsworth in a shark cage. To paraphrase the second greatest Frank of all time, regrets? They've had a few, but while there's certainly more than a few to mention, perhaps we'll just start for the time being with these ones. I'm Adam Nicholas, and these are 10 things WWE regrets about Extreme Rules. Number 10. Extreme Rules began life as one night stand. It's common knowledge these days that Vince McMahon was helping to bankroll Paul Heyman's Extreme Championship Wrestling way back when. McMahon has always been an admirer and appreciator of Heyman's creative genius, but it's that very genius and Paul E's singular vision that would often anger McMahon too. At its core, Extreme Rules is actually a Paul Heyman creation. The event began life back in 2005 as the One Night Stand pay-per-view, which was a celebration of ECW, featuring some of the biggest names that had actually helped to make the brand so popular back in the day. One Night Stand was a nostalgic phenomenon, so much so that it would get a follow-up in 2006, before another 2 installments in 2007 and 2008 respectively. Although the longer it went, the further away from its roots it became, as sports entertainment inevitably began to replace that organic ECW feel. As of 2009, One Night Stand has been rebranded as Extreme Rules, and while Vince and co have managed to turn it into their own family-friendly version of hardcore, you just know that there's always going to be that little pinch of resentment that it started off life as an ECW tribute show. Number 9. The frustration amongst wrestlers. Now, despite what you might think, not every wrestler is super keen to bring an extreme element to their wrestling matches. But for those that do, Extreme Rules is one of the few annual pay-per-views that guarantees an opportunity for superstars to up the ante and take their in-ring action in a more physical direction. Unfortunately, that might also end up providing wrestlers with a little bit of false hope. Despite all the creative and hardcore ideas they might have for, say, a no-holds-barred match, for example, they're immediately hit by the cold, hard realization that this is still a PG product, and most of these elaborate plans would absolutely not be allowed to happen in a WWE ring. Unless, of course, you're Randy Orton, in which case you can stick a screwdriver in somebody's ear whenever you fancy it. In that sense, the very notion of doing an Extreme Rules pay-per-view under the restraints of the PG era becomes a frustrating pair of handcuffs for the talent. And while you could argue it forces people to get creative within the boundaries, it can make it hard for matches to live up to the kind of extremes that a certain competitor seemed to have no issue in dabbling in. Number 8. The company is PG. Now, if you haven't gathered it yet, this is probably going to keep cropping up on this list, so we might as well give it its own individual entry. Now, yes, granted, we've recently seen Kofi Kingston flip Samoa Joe the middle finger and Corey Graves dropping a holy sh on WWE TV, but as of this recording, the company are still very much a PG-rated company. And until that changes, if indeed it ever does, then there's always going to be a limit to extreme action they can actually put out. Credit where it's due, you can't say WWE haven't tried to push that PG rating where possible over the years. But ultimately, the word extreme will always suggest to fans that things are going to be taken to the absolute maximum of human conditioning for a professional wrestler. The only thing is, we're a far cry away from the 90s, 2019 fashion aside, and we're even further away from the bloodshed, profanity and lewd gestures of the Attitude Era. To be fair, in some cases that's probably not a bad thing actually, but truth be told, this pay-per-view tends to actually raise the question as to whether or not there's actually any need for hardcore wrestling or even a place for it in 2019. Number 7. Trying to make CM Punk become an alcoholic. Having faced off at WrestleMania 28, CM Punk and Chris Jericho would do battle once more at Extreme Rules 2012. Said rematch would take place in a Chicago street fight, with the Chicago native Punk coming out victorious once again. The match itself was good, but the element that perhaps left a bad taste in some fans' mouths was the use of alcoholism and substance abuse to help build this rematch and push the boundaries of the rivalry between the two. Famously, CM Punk's upbringing was littered with alcohol and drug issues within his own family. In fact, that's one of the main factors behind the reason that CM Punk was actually straight edge in the first place. Say what you will about the PG era, but seeing Jericho pour a full bottle of Jack Daniels all over Punk within that particular context was a very different kind of edgy. Now, personally, this actually felt like quite a bit of engaging storytelling. We had CM Punk's real-life experiences being drawn on in order to help heighten the drama between himself and Chris Jericho. And I tell you what, I do like a bit of reality in my drama. However, due to the sensitive nature of it all, quite a few people may have found this to be offensive viewing. WWE may regret going down this route, but to be fair, in the absence of ultra-violence and blood, guts and tears, I mean, You had to come up with some shock value from somewhere. Number 6, announcing the death of Osama bin Laden. Extreme Rules 2011 featured the main event of John Cena defending his WWE Championship against John Morrison and The Miz. This was prime Super Cena era, meaning Cena, of course, got the victory. But while the pay-per-view itself was largely forgettable, aside from Christian beating Alberto Del Rio in a ladder match to become World Heavyweight Champion, it was the aftermath of Extreme Rules that grabbed all the headlines. As the show came to a close, news broke that Osama bin Laden had been found and killed by US troops, and that was a message that John Cena had been tasked with announcing to the audience on the night. Now, there are obviously a lot of different ways to look at this, and given the context, it's probably wise to tread carefully here. But the face of the company proudly celebrating the death of, well, literally anybody, to be fair, in front of an audience of thousands, that just doesn't feel right to me. Emotions were obviously running high, and there's an argument to be made that Cena's initial talk of bin Laden was largely for the live crowd in attendance after Extreme Rules had gone off the air. But unfortunately, WWE decided to replay said promo to an audience of millions the very next night on Monday Night Raw. Number 5, the association with Daniel Bryan's medical issues. Now, even if you find yourself booing his extreme environmentalist gimmick at the moment, we all love Daniel Bryan, let's be honest, and there's no arguing that he's certainly one of the very best in the business today. But when it comes to Extreme Rules, the pay-per-view doesn't exactly evoke great memories for both Daniel Bryan and WWE. After his monumental WrestleMania 30 win, Bryan's victory over Kane at Extreme Rules 2014 was his last match before having to relinquish the WWE Championship due to injury. Fast forward a year or so, and at Extreme Rules 2015, Bryan was supposed to defend his recently won Intercontinental Championship against Wade Barrett, but unfortunately, that match never took place. Not only did that Extreme Rules bout not happen, but soon after, Bryan was forced to retire from in-ring action entirely. Thankfully, however, he did make a return, and his comeback has been all sorts of fantastic. But when it comes to Extreme Rules, to be fair to say, it's certainly got a few bad memories for the planet's champion. Although he did have a nice reunion last year as part of Team Hell No with his big pal Kane. Number 4, CM Punk closing out the first show. As previously mentioned, 2009 saw WWE move away from the concept of the ECW-driven one-night stand and transform that pay-per-view into the Extreme Rules event that we have today. After 2 annual one-night stand pay-per-views designed to showcase ECW talent, old and new, the 2007-2008 shows were entirely WWE productions. So by 2009, it came as no surprise to see it finally phased out and rebranded. Nevertheless, the first Extreme Rules pay-per-view would end up with a familiar face from the new era of ECW standing tall. After Jeff Hardy had defeated Edge in a ladder match to become the World Heavyweight Champion in the evening's main event, CM Punk would come down to the ring and steal the show as he cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase on Jeff Hardy and found himself ending the night with his first ever World Heavyweight Championship in WWE. That win is forever etched in the history of Extreme Rules, so given everything that has transpired between Punk and WWE in recent years, and considering the company has done all it can to neither show nor mention Punk since his departure in 2014, WWE must be kicking themselves that they had the Second City Saint feature in such a prominent role. Number 3, the Universal Championship has never featured on Extreme Rules. Yes, as of recording this, just days before Extreme Rules 2019, that statement is 100% factual. Since the Universal title was created in 2016, it has not been defended at any of the Extreme Rules pay-per-views. The Universal title was first introduced on the 25th of July 2016, with Finn Balor going on to become the first ever holder of the championship by defeating Seth Rollins at that year's SummerSlam. But the Extreme Rules event of 2016 had already taken place 1 month prior. Then, of course, a certain Brock Lesnar was the Universal Champion during the time of Extreme Rules 2017, and rather than the Beast Incarnate featuring on the pay-per-view, there was instead a 5-man match to determine the #1 contender to Brock's gold. And by Extreme Rules 2018, despite seemingly every effort from WWE, Lesnar had again found his way back to the Universal Championship. And this time, I think he just couldn't be bothered. The big man does what the big man wants. So here we are, nearly 3 years after the inception of the Universal Championship, and it's only just been defended for the first time at the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. And even then, there's a bit of a caveat there, because we're defending it in, let me see if I can remember this, a last chance, winner takes all, mixed tag, Extreme Rules match for both the Universal Championship and the Raw Women's Championship. Nailed it. Number 2, the Ambrose ASYLUM match. Chris Jericho is hands down one of the greatest of all time in the wrestling business. Dean Ambrose is one of the current generation's most popular superstars, and Jon Moxley is currently the hottest thing in wrestling right now over in AEW. But I think we can all agree that both men will not have Extreme Rules 2016 at the top of their CVs in the near future. While on paper an all-time great going up against a modern favourite in the confines of an unforgiving steel cage sounds rather good. The whole thing ended up being a visual representation of just how much WWE and Vince McMahon didn't understand Dean Ambrose's character. Hanging an assortment of wacky weapons from above the ring, using Mitch the Potted Plant as a heavy plot point, and turning Ambrose up to 11 managed to turn a potentially great match into a very goofy one. Both Jericho and Ambrose have spoken about how their Extreme Rules 2016 match was a bit of a disappointment, and to be honest, I imagine most fans would actually be in agreement. Now, I would argue that, as Jon Moxley mentioned many times on Chris Jericho's podcast, they kind of made the best of what they were given. But given the talents involved, this one should have been a classic. And number 1, not running with Rollins. After 6 months out injured due to a knee injury, Seth Rollins returned at Extreme Rules 2016 and the fans went absolutely mental. At the time, fans were forcibly rejecting Roman Reigns as the guy after a fairly underwhelming WrestleMania 32 coronation and many boos later. They were desperate for change, and CrossFit Jesus was the man who was going to give it to them. After Reigns defeated AJ Styles to retain his WWE Championship, Rollins hit the ring to lay out his former Shield brother, drawing a crazy pop from the WWE Universe. When Seth had gone out injured, he was the biggest heel in the company, but as was proved by the insane reaction in New Jersey's Prudential Center that night, his return had instantly positioned him as the biggest babyface in the company. To call the crowd noise that night Stone Cold-esque would not have been an overstatement. But the celebrations were short-lived, and despite the obvious call for Rollins to be a face moving forward, WWE had him come out the very next night on Raw and cut a heel promo on the fans, because Vince just couldn't see past his obsession with Roman Reigns. Now, given the trajectory of Seth Rollins' character since that creative misstep, you could argue that WWE could probably have saved themselves 3 years of uphill battles if they'd just decided to pull the trigger on Rollins and make him the babyface we all wanted him to be back at Extreme Rules 2016. So there you are, that's it. That's our list on the 10 things that WWE regret about the Extreme Rules pay-per-view. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to like and share. Hit the old subscribe button if you haven't already. You can find the article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. You can follow WhatCulture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me on Twitter at It's Adam Nicholas. Or if you just want some more videos, you can find some right here, I think, hopefully. I'm Adam Nicholas, and I will see you next time.